They arrived in silence, not because they wanted to, but because speaking had become dangerous. In the spring of 1942, a train from Berlin stopped beside a lake north of the town of Fürstenberg. The women inside had already been stripped of their names. Each carried a small tag, marked with a number, a birth year, and the letter KZ, Konzentrationslager. Through the barred windows, they could see water glittering in the distance. Ravensbrück. It almost sounded peaceful. But beyond the fence stood watchtowers, floodlights, and the smell of burning cloth and disinfectant. A guard shouted, "Raus! Schnell!" The women stumbled down onto the gravel. They were teachers, nurses, students, widows, political prisoners, Jehovah's Witnesses, resistance members, and Jews torn from hiding places. Some had come from the Polish underground, others from Norway or France. All were now property of the SS. The camp had been built 3 years earlier, in 1939, under the orders of Heinrich Himmler. It was meant to be the central concentration camp for women in the Reich, a place to isolate, punish, and exploit. By 1945, over 130,000 women and children would pass through its gates. Tens of thousands would never leave. At first glance, Ravensbrück seemed orderly, a grid of wooden barracks surrounded by electric wire. But inside, order meant control. Every dawn, a whistle tore the silence. The prisoners lined up in formation, shivering in the morning mist. Roll call could last hours. A single misstep, a single whisper could mean a beating, or worse, the bunker. A concrete cell beneath the command building where screams were swallowed by the walls. In the early years, women sewed uniforms and boots for the German army. Later, they were sent to Siemens' nearby factory, assembling fuses and electrical parts under conditions that broke both body and mind. The workday stretched from before sunrise until night. Food rations shrank to watery soup and a crust of bread. Weight dropped. Hair fell out. Among them was a Polish nurse named Maria. She had joined the resistance in Warsaw, smuggling medicine to wounded fighters. Arrested in a Gestapo raid, she was sent here as prisoner 45,173. Her hands, once steady and precise, now trembled from hunger. But she still tried to help others. When women collapsed at the machines, she whispered what little advice she could. Breathe slowly. Don't faint. Don't give them a reason. At night, Maria and others shared bunks so narrow they could barely turn. The stench of sickness filled the air. Lice moved freely. Somewhere in a distance, the hum of generators never stopped. And then came the rumors of the Revier, the camp hospital. Some women were taken there and never returned. Others came back with bandaged legs and eyes filled with terror. They spoke of operations without anesthesia, of wounds deliberately infected, of names written on lists for medical research. The doctors called them Versuchspersonen, experimental subjects. The women called it what it was: torture. The Revier smelled of carbolic acid and fear. Its walls were whitewashed, its beds neatly aligned, a parody of a hospital. But here, healing was never the goal. Here, medicine served the Reich. In 1942, Himmler gave permission for scientific experiments on selected prisoners. The program was run by SS doctors Karl Gebhardt, Fritz Fischer, and Hertha Oberhäuser. They claimed it was to test new treatments for battlefield wounds and infections. In reality, it was mutilation disguised as research. The victims were mostly young Polish women, members of the resistance who had already survived interrogations and torture. Inside Ravensbrück, They became known as die Kaninchen, the rabbits, because they hopped when they tried to walk after surgery, their legs cut open and sewn again. The procedures were methodical. Doctors made long incisions in the calves and inserted glass, wood splinters, or bacteria taken from infected soldiers. The wounds were deliberately contaminated to imitate battle injuries. Some women were given sulfa drugs. Others received nothing, serving as controls. Pain became the experiment's metric. Witnesses later recalled the sounds, the scrape of metal trays, the groan when consciousness returned, the shuffle of bandaged feet along the barrack floors. Infection spread quickly. Those who could no longer walk were carried by others. The SS forbade anyone to help, but nurses and prisoners risked their lives to clean wounds secretly with smuggled cloth and boiled water. Dr. Oberheiser was notorious. A young woman with a calm voice, she injected phenol or gasoline directly into hearts when the subjects became too weak. She called it a mercy. Maria, the Polish nurse, found herself tending to one of the rabbits after work hours. The girl's name was Janina, only 22, her legs swollen twice its size, black veins creeping upward. Maria wrapped it in rags torn from her own clothing. Janina whispered, "If I die, tell my sister I wasn't afraid." Maria promised, though she didn't even know where Janina's sister was. Resistance began quietly. Prisoners memorized names, operations, dates. They hid scraps of bandages as proof, buried notes under floorboards. In 1943, when rumors spread that all rabbits would be executed to erase the evidence, the women of Ravensbrück acted together. They built false walls, hid the injured, and refused roll call to delay selections. German overseers beat them, locked them in dark cells, but they didn't betray a name. Survival became an act of rebellion. By 1944, the camp held more than 50 subcamps and satellite factories feeding the Nazi war machine. Yet inside this empire of suffering, whispers of courage endured. Women translating secret letters, mothers teaching children songs in the barracks, political prisoners sharing news from the front. As Allied bombs fell closer to Berlin, the SS grew desperate. Executions increased. Transports to Auschwitz resumed. The rabbits knew that liberation might come too late, but they also knew the world had to hear their story. By early 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing, and Ravensbrück was drowning in its own chaos. The trains that once carried women into the camp now ran out of coal. The SS began sending prisoners on foot, hundreds of kilometers through snow and mud, toward other camps that no longer existed. They called them evacuations. The women called them what they were: death marches. Inside the fences, conditions reached the edge of apocalypse. Overcrowding had turned the barracks into human cages. Food rations disappeared almost entirely. Typhus and dysentery spread faster than the guards could bury the dead. Each day, trucks carried away bodies to the crematorium, where the smoke hung low and bitter over the lake. The SS commandant, Fritz Suren, knew the war was lost. Yet even as Allied forces advanced, he ordered new killings, executions of political prisoners, of the rabbits, of anyone who might testify. On the morning of April 25, 1945, the guards marched dozens of Polish women to the woods behind the camp. The sound of gunfire echoed briefly, then silence. But not all died there. Weeks earlier, word of the experiments had reached the Swedish Red Cross through secret channels. Count Folke Bernadotte, negotiated with Himmler himself for the release of prisoners. In late April, white buses bearing red crosses rolled into Germany. Against all odds, they reached Ravensbrück. For the survivors, the sight of those buses felt unreal, white against the black smoke of the crematorium. Nurses stepped out with blankets and food. The SS guards watched, uncertain, as the first women, skeletal, barefoot, wrapped in rags, climbed aboard. Among them was Maria. She could barely stand, but she refused to leave without Janina. They found her in a barrack, feverish but alive. Together they crossed the gate, the same gate they had entered 3 years before, under shouts and rifle barrels. Behind them, Ravensbrück was collapsing. The guards fled, burning documents, destroying records. When Soviet troops arrived on April 30th, they found only about 3,000 women still inside, too weak to move. Piles of ashes marked where thousands had been erased. In the months that followed, the survivors were scattered across hospitals and refugee centers. Many never found their families again. Some carried lifelong wounds. Others bore scars only silence could describe. But they spoke, in courtrooms, in diaries, in testimonies that rebuilt what the Nazis had tried to obliterate. In 1947, in Hamburg, the Ravensbrück trials began. Hertha Oberhäuser, the camp doctor who had injected phenol into hearts, stood in the dock alongside other SS women. She called herself a patriot. The judges called her what she was, a murderer. She was sentenced to 20 years. Few others received more than a fraction of that. Justice, like the survivors, walked with a limp, and yet, memory endured. In the ruins of the camp, a monument rose. A woman carved from stone, standing barefoot, her face turned toward the lake. Beneath her feet, the ashes of thousands rest. Maria's name never appeared in the official records, neither did Janina's. But their story lives in the testimonies, in the quiet conviction that dignity can survive even in a place built to destroy it. Ravensbrück was not an accident of war. It was design, calculated, gendered, and cruel. And for every woman who died there, thousands more learned what it meant to resist simply by staying alive.